Manipulation rarely sounds aggressive. In fact, the most effective manipulation often sounds calm, logical, and completely reasonable. That is exactly why it works. Most people imagine manipulation as obvious pressure. Someone forcing an idea, someone dominating a conversation, someone openly trying to control others. But real manipulation is usually far more subtle. It begins with a simple psychological trick. The manipulator presents a story that appears logical on the surface. The explanation feels clear. The reasoning sounds structured. And because the story makes sense, people stop questioning it. Human beings are naturally drawn to explanations that feel coherent. When something sounds organized and confident, the brain quickly accepts it as credible. Not because it has been proven, but because it feels complete. This is why skilled manipulators rarely argue emotionally. They appear calm. They appear rational. They present their ideas as if they are simply explaining reality. The listener begins to relax, because nothing in the conversation appears threatening. Nothing sounds extreme. Everything feels reasonable. But behind the explanation, something important is happening. The manipulator is controlling the frame of the conversation. Instead of allowing multiple interpretations, the explanation quietly limits how the situation can be understood. Certain details are emphasized. Other details are ignored. Alternative explanations are never mentioned. The listener is not forced to accept the idea, but the structure of the story makes other possibilities less visible. Over time, the explanation begins to feel like the obvious conclusion. Not because it is necessarily correct, but because it is the only explanation that has been presented clearly. This technique works especially well in complex situations. When people feel uncertain, they naturally gravitate toward explanations that appear confident and structured. Clarity feels comforting, even when the clarity is artificial. Observant individuals often notice something interesting during these conversations. The explanation may sound logical, but it quietly benefits the person presenting it. That is usually the first signal. When a story consistently supports the interests of the person telling it, the explanation deserves closer examination. Careful thinkers therefore ask a different question. Not simply whether the explanation sounds reasonable, but who benefits if the explanation is accepted. This small shift changes how the entire conversation is interpreted. Because manipulation rarely depends on strong arguments, it depends on controlling how the situation is framed. Once someone begins examining the frame itself, the illusion often becomes visible. Details that were previously ignored suddenly appear important. Alternative interpretations begin to emerge. The situation becomes more complex again. And complexity is exactly what manipulation tries to remove. Because the moment people begin exploring multiple perspectives, the manipulator loses control of the narrative. Understanding this pattern creates a powerful advantage, not because manipulation disappears, but because its structure becomes easier to recognize. And once the structure becomes visible, even the most reasonable-sounding story can be examined more carefully.